$200,000. Say that number out loud for a second. $200,000. Now imagine waking up one morning and realizing that every single dollar of that, every cent, is not in your bank account. It's not in a retirement fund. It's not tied up in a house or a car or anything you can touch. It is owed to credit card companies, to medical institutions, to student loan services, to a system that handed you money you didn't fully understand and then silently added interest while you were just trying to live. This is the story of Michael Bennett, an ordinary American from Columbus, Ohio, a man who, by the age of 42, had accumulated $206,000 in debt, and who, 8 years later, was completely, entirely debt-free. Not because he won the lottery, not because a rich uncle died, not because he found some viral side hustle on the internet, but because of decisions, painful ones, humiliating ones, and eventually liberating ones. This is not a story about money. This is a story about survival. And it is also a story about something else. Something that doesn't get talked about enough. It is a story about the gap. The gap between the life America promises you and the financial tools America never bothers to teach you. Because here is a fact that should make you angry. In the United States, the average high school student graduates, having taken 0 classes in personal finance, 0 classes in how interest works, 0 classes in what a credit score actually means, 0 classes in the difference between an asset and a liability. They teach you the quadratic formula. They do not teach you what happens when you make only minimum payments on a credit card for 20 years. And that gap, that silence, is where Michael Bennett's story begins. Not with bad decisions, with no decisions. With a young man doing exactly what he was told to do. Walking into a financial system he didn't understand, and learning the hard way what nobody had bothered to explain. Michael Bennett grew up in a small house in Westerville, Ohio. His father, Robert, drove a delivery truck for 30 years. Same company, same route, same lunch pail every morning. Robert Bennett was not a man who talked about money, not because he was secretive, but because money, in his world, was simple. You worked, you got paid, you paid your bills. You did not spend what you did not have. That was the entire philosophy. It worked for Robert because Robert lived in a world where a delivery truck job came with a pension, where healthcare was employer provided and largely uncomplicated, where a man with a high school diploma could buy a house and raise a family on a single income. That world was already disappearing when Michael was born in 1978. By the time Michael graduated high school in 1996, it was essentially gone. Michael's mother, Carol, worked part-time at a pharmacy. She raised 3 kids, Michael, his sister Dana, and his brother Kevin. She drove a used minivan. She clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. She somehow managed to put a hot meal on the table every single night. They were not wealthy, but Michael never thought of them as poor either. There was always food. There were always Christmas gifts. The heat worked in winter, and so Michael grew up with the belief that most working-class Americans quietly carry in their chest. That if you work hard, things will be okay. It is a beautiful belief. It is also dangerously incomplete, because working hard is necessary. But working hard without understanding money is like running a race without knowing where the finish line is. You can exhaust yourself completely and still end up exactly where you started, or worse, further back. Michael was accepted to Ohio State University in 1996. His parents were proud. The whole family was proud. First in the family to go to a 4-year university. The financial aid office showed him his package, grants covering about half the tuition, and student loans covering the rest. The loans totaled $28,000 over 4 years. Michael signed the paperwork in 20 minutes. He was 17 years old. He did not read every page. He did not fully understand what compound interest meant. He did not ask what the monthly payment would be after graduation. Neither did anyone in his family, because nobody in his family had done this before, and the financial aid officer, who processed hundreds of these forms a year, did not explain it either. Michael says now, "They handed me the pen and pointed to the line. Nobody sat me down and said, 'Here is what this money is going to cost you.'" He signed, and the clock started. College was 4 good years. Michael studied business administration. He made friends. He worked part-time at a campus bookstore. He graduated in May of 2002, 22 years old, wearing a cap and gown, standing next to his parents, who were beaming with pride, with $28,000 in student debt and no clear plan for how to pay it off. But that felt okay, because everyone he knew had student debt. It was normal. That normalization, the way an entire generation was taught to treat debt as ordinary, is one of the most consequential financial shifts in American history. In 1970, the average student loan debt at graduation was essentially zero. Most students either paid their way through school or went to local schools that were genuinely affordable. By 2002, when Michael graduated, student loan debt had become a standard feature of young American life. By 2024, Americans collectively owed over $1.7 trillion in student loans. Trillion, with A.T. Michael's 28,000, was a small piece of that number. But it was his piece. And it would follow him for the next 18 years. His first job was at a logistics company in Columbus. Operations coordinator, $36,000 a year. He found a 1-bedroom apartment near downtown. $840 a month. He bought a used 2000 Toyota Camry with 80,000 miles on it. Financed, of course, and then the credit card. A representative from Visa came to his workplace in September 2002. There was a table in the break room. Free t-shirt if you applied. Michael filled out the application. $2,000-5-100 limit. 21.9% interest rate. He didn't focus on that number. Nobody had ever told him to. He got the card. He told himself he would use it only for emergencies and pay it off in full every month. That is what almost everyone says when they get their first credit card. It is what almost nobody actually does. Within 6 months, the card had a balance of $1,400. Not from emergencies. From the ordinary friction of being alive. A parking ticket. A birthday dinner he didn't want to miss. A new winter coat. A car repair. None of it reckless. All of it real. And all of it now accumulating interest at 21.9%. By 2005, Michael had received 2 promotions and a raise. He was making $48,000 a year. He had paid down the credit card twice and run it back up twice. He had refinanced the car loan once. His student loans were on an income-based repayment plan, meaning he paid a small amount each month, not enough to cover the interest, so the balance was actually growing. He knew this vaguely. It bothered him vaguely. But he was 27, making decent money, and life was good. That year, at a friend's birthday party, he met Sandra Kowalski. She was a registered nurse at Ohio State Medical Center. 26 years old, warm, direct, with a laugh that made the whole room turn. Michael says, "I knew within about 3 conversations that I was going to marry her. They dated for 2 years. 2 years of dinners and concerts and weekend trips, most of which went on credit cards because their cash flow never quite seemed to cover everything. Neither of them talked about money in any serious way. They talked about their jobs, their families, their plans, but not about debt, not about interest rates, not about what it was going to cost to build a life together. They got married in June 2007. The wedding cost $22,000. They paid $14,000 of it on credit cards. They told themselves they would pay it off within a year. They did not. In August 2007, they bought a house. A 3-bedroom colonial in Hilliard, a suburb of Columbus. Good school district, small backyard, 2-car garage. Purchase price, $187,000. They put down 5%, $9,350, most of which came from wedding gift money. 30-year mortgage at 6.2%. Monthly payment, $1,243. They were both working. Their combined income was just over $90,000. Their combined debt, student loans, car loans, credit cards. The remnants of the wedding was just under $70,000. They didn't know that number exactly. Neither of them had ever sat down and added it all up. On paper, everything was fine. On paper, they were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. College, career, marriage, house, the American sequence, the American promise. But paper doesn't tell you about the water heater that breaks in January. Paper doesn't warn you about the medical bill that insurance only partially covers. Paper doesn't explain that a 30-year mortgage on a $187,000 house means you'll actually pay the bank over $340,000 by the time it's done. Paper doesn't prepare you for the gap between what life costs and what life pays. Nobody does. The first crack appeared in 2008. Michael was 30 years old. The housing market was collapsing across America. The financial crisis that had been building for a decade finally broke open in September 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The stock market fell. Companies across America began cutting costs. The logistics firm where Michael worked was no exception. They announced the first round of layoffs in October 2008. Michael survived. He was relieved. He told Sandra they were going to be okay. The second round came in January 2009. Michael survived again. But this time, relief felt different, thinner, more fragile. The third round came in March. Michael did not survive. He was called into his manager's office on a Tuesday morning, given a box, told his last day was Friday. He drove home in the middle of the morning, which he had never done on a workday in his adult life, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Sandra was at work. The house was empty. He sat at the kitchen table and did the math on a notepad. Their savings, $1,400. Monthly expenses, just under $4,800. Sandra's take-home nursing income, $2,800 a month. Unemployment benefit he would receive, approximately $1,200 a month. Combined monthly income, $4,000. Monthly shortfall, approximately $800. Every month, starting now. He stared at that number. $800 a month. It doesn't sound catastrophic. But $800 a month, month after month, with no end date in sight. With credit cards already carrying balances. With student loans still growing. With a mortgage that did not pause because you lost your job. $800 a month is a slow leak in a boat. You don't sink immediately. You just keep taking on water. Michael sent out resumes every day. He followed up, he networked. He drove 2 interviews in his suit, which he had dry cleaned to save money on replacing it. The job market in Columbus in early 2009 was brutal, not just in logistics, everywhere. The credit card, the original Visa that started at $2,500, was now maxed. They opened a second card to cover groceries. Chase Sapphire, $3,000 limit. Then a third card when the car needed brake work. $2,000 limit from Capital One. Sandra's income kept the mortgage paid. Barely, but everything else started bleeding. The minimum payments alone were consuming more of their cash flow each month. And because they were making only minimums, the balances were barely moving. 11 weeks after losing his job, Michael got a call back from a smaller logistics firm in Dublin, Ohio. The pay was less. $41,000 a year instead of $48,000, but it was a job. He took it, and he felt, genuinely, that the crisis was over. That they had survived. What he could not see, because he was too exhausted from treading water, was that the crisis had not ended. It had just changed shape. The visible emergency was over. The invisible damage was just beginning. Because during those 11 weeks, they had added approximately $9,000 in credit card debt, and they had not dealt with it. They had just started making minimum payments and agreed, silently, not to talk about it. And minimum payments on high-interest credit cards are one of the most elegant financial traps ever designed. Here is how it works. Credit card companies set minimum payments low on purpose, usually 1 to 2% of the balance. This keeps you in debt longer, which means you pay more interest, which means more profit for them. If you carry $8,000 on a credit card with a 22% interest rate, which is close to the national average, and you make only minimum payments, it will take you approximately 22 years to pay it off, and you will pay nearly $13,000 in interest alone. On top of the original $8,000 you borrowed, you will pay $21,000 for $8,000 of purchases. This is not a secret. It is disclosed in the fine print of every credit card agreement. But fine print, by design, does not get read. And this information is not taught in schools. So millions of Americans carry credit card debt for decades and never fully understand why the balance never seems to go down. Michael was one of those millions. He made his minimums. He went back to work. He told himself the debt was under control, and life moved on. In 2010, Michael's father, Robert, passed away. A heart attack, sudden, at 63 years old. The funeral cost $9,000. Michael's mother did not have savings to cover it. Michael put $6,000 on a credit card. He told himself it was an emergency. It was. But it also meant the balance he had been slowly paying down jumped back up to nearly where it had started. That is the nature of the debt treadmill. You make progress, life happens, you lose the progress, you start again. 2011 arrived with what felt like good news. Sandra was pregnant. They were genuinely, deeply happy. Michael had been promoted to senior coordinator. Their combined income had recovered to nearly $80,000. They bought new furniture for the baby's room. They told themselves things were finally turning around. Emma Grace Bennett was born on November 14, 2011. 6 pounds, 2 ounces. She came 6 weeks early. The doctors said it was manageable. She was small but strong. She needed observation. She was placed in the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU. For 12 days, Michael and Sandra lived at the hospital, taking turns sleeping in a chair beside her incubator, watching monitors, talking to nurses, praying. On the 12th day, Emma came home, healthy, perfect. With a laugh, even then, that seemed too big for her small body. 3 weeks later, the bill arrived, $89,000, for 12 days. Michael opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Read the number, read it again. He had seen large numbers before. The mortgage, the student loans. But this number for his daughter's life essentially landed differently. It landed with a weight that the others hadn't. Insurance covered 70%, that left their portion, $26,700. The hospital offered a payment plan, $500 a month. Michael set it up, and then he put the bill in a drawer. And he did not tell Sandra the full amount. He told her their portion was around $15,000. He didn't know why he lied. He would spend years trying to understand that impulse. His best explanation, eventually, was this: I thought if she knew how bad it really was, she would lose faith that I could fix it, and I couldn't stand that. So I protected her from the truth and told myself I was doing it for her. But I was doing it for me. That lie, that first lie about money, would not be the last. From 2011 to 2015, Michael and Sandra did what millions of Americans do when the debt becomes too large to look at directly. They looked away. They made minimum payments. They took out a personal loan to consolidate 2 credit cards, which gave them a brief sense of progress. And then, within 18 months, both credit cards were nearly maxed out again. This cycle has a name among financial researchers. They call it the debt treadmill. You borrow to pay off debt. You accumulate new debt. You borrow again. You feel like you're moving, but the ground beneath you is moving in the opposite direction at the same speed. In 2012, they refinanced the mortgage to lower the monthly payment. The refinance cost them $3,000 in fees, which they rolled into the loan. This meant they now owed more on the house than when they bought it. But the monthly payment dropped by $140. It felt like relief. It was not relief. It was extending the timeline of debt. In 2013, Michael's mother Carol got sick. Congestive heart failure. She lived alone in Westerville. Robert had been gone 3 years, and she could no longer manage the house by herself. Moving her into assisted living would cost $4,000 a month. They could not afford that. Michael hired a part-time home health aide instead. $1,400 a month. He put it on a credit card. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself his mother would get better. He told himself things would turn around. He told himself the things we all tell ourselves when we don't have a plan, that time will somehow solve the problem that we can't face. Carol Bennett declined slowly through 2014. Michael drove to Westerville every Sunday. He sat with his mother. He helped her with small tasks. He watched her get smaller. She passed away in December 2014. Quietly, in her own bed. On a Tuesday morning, Michael held her hand. The funeral cost $11,200. Michael put $7,000 of it on credit. He told himself his mother deserved a proper service. She did. But the credit card didn't know the difference between a necessity and a tribute. It charged the same 22% either way. By January 2015, Michael had been carrying significant debt for nearly 7 years. He had never written all of it down in one place. He had never added it all up. He had managed it the way most people manage chronic pain, by not looking at it directly, by treating each piece separately, by telling himself it was under control, even as it quietly grew. The full picture, for the first time written down. Student loans, $41,000. Credit cards, 7 of them, $62,000. Medical debt, Emma's NICU bill plus follow-up bills, $34,000. Personal loans, $18,000. Home equity line of credit, opened in 2013, $28,000. Car loans, 2 vehicles, $19,000. Mortgage, remaining $141,000. Total non-mortgage consumer debt, $174,000. Total including mortgage, $315,000. Michael was 37 years old. He was making $63,000 a year. Sandra was making $51,000. On paper, they were a solidly middle-class American family. In reality, they were drowning, and only one of them knew how deep the water was. The second email address had existed for about 2 years. Michael had created it in early 2013, when the collection notices started arriving. Not for major delinquencies, he was making minimums on everything, but for the medical debt which had been sold to a collection agency that sent letters with red borders and urgent language. He didn't want Sandra to see those letters, so he had set up a separate email. He gave that address to the collection agency. He gave it to 2 of the credit card companies as well. Sandra had no idea it existed. Every month, Michael checked that inbox alone. Every month, the numbers in those emails were a little worse. And every month, he closed the laptop and went back to being the person Sandra believed him to be. A man who had things under control. He did not have things under control. The marriage counselor's name was Dr. Patricia Hughes. She had a practice in Upper Arlington, a comfortable suburb west of Columbus. She had been doing couples counseling for 26 years. She drove a sensible Volvo and kept her office intentionally neutral. No art that might suggest a political opinion. No books visible that might suggest a therapeutic agenda. Just 2 chairs, a couch, a small table with a box of tissues. Michael and Sandra started seeing her in March 2015. Not because of money officially, because they had stopped talking, not fighting, not angry, just quiet. The kind of quiet that is more frightening than shouting, because it means to people have given up trying to reach each other. Sandra had suggested counseling. Michael had agreed immediately, which surprised her. Later, he would tell her why he agreed so quickly. "I knew I was going to have to tell you eventually. I think I was hoping someone else would be in the room when I did." Dr. Hughes saw them for 4 sessions before she identified what was underneath the silence. She had learned, over 2.5 decades, that financial secrets were among the most common and most destructive forces in a marriage. More common than affairs, more destructive, sometimes, because an affair is visible. It creates a crisis you can name. A financial secret lives underground, poisoning trust slowly, leaving both partners confused about why they feel so far apart. In the 4th session, she asked Michael directly, "Is there something you haven't told Sandra that you believe she would want to know?" The room was very quiet. Michael looked at his hands. He looked at Sandra. He looked at Dr. Hughes, and he was quiet for 40 seconds. Sandra told me later that those 40 seconds felt like the longest of her life. Not because she feared what he was about to say, but because in that silence, she understood that, whatever it was, it had been true for a long time. Michael described the second email address. He described it carefully, methodically. The collection notices, the 7 credit cards, the personal loans, the medical debt he had understated by nearly $12,000. The home equity line she knew existed, but didn't know the balance of. And then he said the number, not the mortgage, the consumer debt. $174,000. Sandra didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't run out of the room. She sat very still for a long time. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was completely composed. And then she said 2 words. "How long?" And Michael said, "About 4 years. Maybe 5. She nodded once, slowly, like someone absorbing a physical blow and refusing to fall. That night, Sandra slept at her sister's house. She left after dinner. She packed a small bag. She kissed Emma goodnight. She did not say goodbye to Michael. He sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time after Emma was asleep. And then he got up, found a legal pad in the junk drawer, and wrote down, for the first time in his life, every single debt he had. Every balance, every interest rate, every minimum payment, every creditor's name and phone number. He worked from memory first. Then he opened his laptop. Then he opened the second email address. He wrote for 2 hours. When he was done, he had filled 4 pages of the legal pad. He looked at it for a long time, and he felt something he had not expected. Not despair, not panic, relief, because for the first time in 5 years, the monster was on the table, not hiding in an email folder, not lurking at the back of a drawer. It was right there, visible, finite, real. It was terrible, but it had a shape, and things that have a shape can be dealt with. Things that have no shape, things you refuse to look at, grow in the dark and eat you alive. Sandra came home 2 days later. She sat across from him at that same table. She looked at the legal pad. She looked at every page. She asked 3 questions. The first, is there anything else? Anything I don't know? Michael said no. The second, are we going to lose the house? Michael said he didn't think so. Not if they made a plan. The third question was the one he would never forget. She looked up from the legal pad. She looked directly at him, and she said, "Okay, so what are we going to do about it?" Not, "I'm leaving you." Not, "How could you do this to us?" Not even, "How could you lie to me for 5 years?" What are we going to do about it? Michael says that sentence saved his life. Not because it erased what he had done. It didn't. Not because it ended the pain. It didn't do that either. But because it was, without question, the most generous thing anyone had ever said to him. It was Sandra saying, "I am still here. We are still us. Now let's fix it." The first thing they agreed on was information, not motivation, not inspiration, not a pep talk or a vision board. Information, cold, clear. Specific information about what they were dealing with and what their options were. Michael bought 3 books that week. He read them in the evenings after Emma was asleep. The first was about the psychology of debt, why intelligent people make financially destructive decisions, and how shame and secrecy make those decisions worse. He read whole chapters with a sense of recognition that was equal parts painful and clarifying. The second book was about practical debt payoff strategies, the Avalanche method, the snowball method, the mechanics of how to sequence debt elimination for maximum efficiency. The third book was about the American credit system, how credit scores work, how collection agencies operate, what your rights are as a debtor. Michael says, "I had spent 15 years inside this system, and I understood almost none of it. Reading those 3 books was like someone finally turning the lights on." He also found a community online, a forum, now tens of thousands of members of ordinary Americans doing exactly what he was attempting. People sharing spreadsheets. People posting their monthly debt totals. People celebrating when they paid off a card. People asking for advice when they hit a setback. Most of them not wealthy. Most of them not finance professionals. Just regular people who had decided that the life waiting on the other side was worth the discomfort of getting there. Michael lurked for a week before he posted. His first post was simple. He wrote their total debt number. He wrote that they were starting. Within 24 hours, 43 people had responded. Some with practical advice, some with encouragement, some with their own stories, similar or worse. He says he cried reading those responses, not from sadness, from recognition, from the realization that this was not a personal failing. This was a structural problem affecting millions of Americans. And millions of Americans were fighting their way out of it. He was not alone. He had never been alone. He just hadn't known where to look. The plan took 2 weeks to build. Michael and Sandra worked on it together, at the same kitchen table where she had looked at the legal pad, on evenings after Emma was in bed. They were not fighting. They were building. It was the most intimate they had been in years. Component 1. The budget. A real budget. Not a rough idea. Not a vague intention to spend less. A zero-based budget, meaning every single dollar of income was assigned a specific purpose before the month began. This concept had never occurred to either of them. They had always managed money reactively, spending as needs arose, checking the bank balance occasionally, hoping the numbers worked out. Zero-based budgeting requires you to be proactive, to decide in advance what every dollar is for. Their combined net take-home was approximately $8,400 a month. They wrote down every fixed expense first. Mortgage, $1,243. Utilities, average $212. Car insurance, $218. Health insurance premiums, $340. Cell phones, $160. Internet, $79. Then the variable necessities. Groceries. They had been spending over $800 a month. They cut it to $480. This required meal planning. This required Sandra spending Sunday afternoons preparing food for the week. She did it without complaint. Transportation, gas, maintenance fund, $380. Childcare for Emma, $620. Medical copays and prescriptions, average $160. Then the debt minimums, 7 credit cards, 3 personal loans, the medical debt payment plan, the student loans, the home equity line minimum, the 2 car loans. Total minimum payments, $1,840 a month. When they added everything up, their fixed and necessary expenses totaled approximately $7,060. That left $1,340 every month. $1,340 that was not claimed by a necessity or a minimum payment. Michael looked at that number for a long time. He says, "I had been carrying this debt for years, feeling like I had no room to maneuver. And there it was. Over $1,000 a month. Not doing anything useful, just sort of. Leaking away. Where had it been going? Restaurants, subscriptions they had forgotten about. Amazon purchases that felt small individually. Convenience spending. The coffee, the lunch out, the movie on a whim. None of it extravagant. All of it, in aggregate, substantial. They cancelled every subscription except one streaming service. They stopped eating out entirely. Not forever, they told themselves. Just for now. That $1,340 became their weapon. Component 2. The method. They chose the debt avalanche. List every debt by interest rate. Highest to lowest. Make minimum payments on everything. Take every extra dollar and throw it at the highest interest debt. When that debt is gone, take the payment you were making on it and add it to the minimum payment on the next highest, and so on. The mathematical logic is clean. The highest interest debt costs the most per day. Eliminating it first saves the most money over time. The credit card at 28.9% was costing them approximately $3.30 in interest every single day. Every day it existed, they lost $3.30. They targeted it first. Component 3. Income expansion. Sandra picked up extra nursing shifts, 2 additional 12-hour shifts per month. It was hard. She was already working full-time with a 3-year-old at home. But she did it. Net additional income, approximately $800 a month. Michael evaluated his skills. Operations management, supply chain coordination, process improvement. He registered on 2 freelance platforms. Within 6 weeks, he had his first client, a small manufacturing firm that needed help optimizing their receiving process. 22 hours of work, $1,800. He reinvested that money directly into debt. Over the following months, freelance income averaged $600 to $900 a month. Combined, the extra income added approximately $1,600 to $1,700 to their debt-fighting capacity each month. Total monthly ammunition, nearly $3,000. Against debt, with interest rates ranging from 7 to 29%. Component 4. Community. Every week, Michael posted to the forum. He shared their monthly numbers. He asked questions when he was confused. He celebrated when they hit milestones. And he received, in return, something he hadn't expected to need: accountability. The knowledge that other people were watching, that other people cared, that other people would notice if he stopped posting. That knowledge made quitting feel less like an option. Sandra was more private. She read the forum, but rarely posted. But she benefited from it through Michael's reports. He would come to bed sometimes, she told me, and say, "You won't believe what this woman in Montana did. She paid off $42,000 in 18 months on a teacher's salary." And I would think, okay, we can do this. They targeted the first debt, a Capital One card, 28.9%. Balance, $4,200. With their focused extra payments, they threw everything at it for 4 months. In the 5th month, they made the final payment. Michael called Capital One. He navigated the phone tree. He waited on hold for 11 minutes. He spoke to a representative and authorized the final payment, $2,160. The balance went to zero. The account was paid in full. He sat in his car in the hospital parking lot. Sandra was on shift, and he called her. She picked up on the second ring. He said, "It's gone." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "One down," he cried. He says he cried not because it was over. That card was just one of many. He cried because for the first time in years, he felt like what he did mattered. Like his actions had consequences he could actually see. He drove home. He got the legal pad. He drew a single line through Capital One, and he moved to the next one. Year 1 ended with $22,400 paid off. Year 2 ended with $29,100 more. By December 2017, their consumer debt had dropped from $174,000 to approximately $122,500. $51,500 eliminated. In 2 years, while raising a child, while working full-time jobs plus extra hours, while learning, for the first time, how to actually manage money. That is significant. By any measure, that is significant. But here is the thing about paying off debt that nobody warns you about. It doesn't always feel significant. Because $122,000 still feels enormous. Because the sacrifices feel very real, and the progress can feel very abstract. Because you can't hold $51,000 of eliminated debt in your hands. You can only see it on a spreadsheet. And some nights, a spreadsheet is a cold comfort. This is the part of the story that most financial content skips. The middle, the long, unglamorous, grinding middle, where there is no rock-bottom drama, and there is no triumphant ending. Just Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Thursday, and the same budget spreadsheet. And the same question that surfaces, usually around month 18 or 20, is this actually working? Is it worth it? Is this what the rest of my life is going to be? 2017 was the hardest year. Not 2015, when everything was revealed. Not 2011, when the NICU bill arrived. 2017. Because by 2017 they had been at it for 2 years, and they still had more than $100,000 to go, and the sacrifices were accumulating. No vacations. Not a single one in 2 years. Sandra had declined a bachelorette weekend for her closest friend. The guilt of that stayed with her for months. Their car had 140,000 miles on it. Every unfamiliar sound from the engine felt like a threat. They had stopped going to restaurants. They had stopped going to concerts. They had stopped the small, spontaneous pleasures that make ordinary life feel like more than obligation. Emma, who was 5 and then 6, was starting to notice differences between her life and her classmates' lives. She noticed that some of her friends went on spring break trips. She noticed that some families went out for pizza on Friday nights. She didn't complain, but children notice. One evening in October 2017, she asked why they never went to Disney World. Several kids in her class had been that year. She had seen the photos. Michael was washing dishes. He turned off the water. He dried his hands. He sat down at the table with her. He thought for a moment about what to say. And then he told her the truth. Not the adult version of the truth. A version she could hold. He said, "We owe some people money. A lot of money. And until we pay it back, we're choosing not to buy new things. Because that's what honest people do. They pay back what they owe." Emma thought about this. She was quiet in the way 6-year-olds are quiet when they are taking something seriously. And then she said, "Okay, Daddy, when we're done, can we go to Disney?" He said yes. He got up and went to the desk in the corner. He opened the debt spreadsheet. He scrolled to the very bottom. Beneath all the numbers in a blank cell, he typed 4 words. Disney, when we're done. He says he looked at that for a long time, and something shifted. Not dramatically, not with the trumpet fanfare, just something settled. A purpose that was more than a number. A destination that was more than freedom from debt. A little girl's question. An honest answer. A promise. He did not break that promise. In January 2018, Michael was promoted to Director of Operations. His salary jumped to $84,000. In March, his freelance consulting business had grown consistent enough that he incorporated it as an LLC. He began paying himself a proper rate. The LLC was generating approximately $2,200 a month net. Their combined household income had climbed to approximately $11,800 a month after taxes. With their now disciplined expenses running at roughly $3,900, they had nearly $8,000 a month going directly toward debt. The debts began falling faster. January 2018, personal loan from Lending Club, gone. April 2018, the Chase Sapphire card, gone. June 2018, the second car, a 2015 Honda Accord, paid off entirely, gone. August 2018, The medical debt from Emma's NICU stay still, partially in collections, settled for 62 cents on the dollar after Michael called and negotiated directly. That negotiation deserves attention, because many Americans don't know this is possible. When medical debt goes to collections, the collection agency typically purchases it for a fraction of the face value, sometimes 10 or 15 cents on the dollar, sometimes even less. The collection agency's job is to collect as much as possible above what they paid. When Michael called and offered 60 cents on the dollar, the agency's representative checked with a supervisor and called back within 2 hours. They accepted because 60 cents was still 4 times what they had paid for the debt. Michael saved nearly $12,000 by making one phone call, and knowing enough to make it. He had learned this from the forum. From a post by a woman in Georgia who had eliminated $64,000 in medical debt through negotiation alone. This is the power of information. This is why financial literacy is not academic. It is practical. It is the difference between paying full price on a debt and paying 60 cents on the dollar. It is money. By December 2018, their consumer debt stood at $61,000, down from $174,000. In 3 years and 9 months, they went out for dinner that New Year's Eve. A real restaurant, not fast food, not takeout. A sit-down restaurant with cloth napkins. They got a babysitter. They ordered appetizers. They ordered dessert. Michael ordered a glass of wine. Sandra ordered one too. They sat across from each other and they talked. Not about debt, not about budgets. They talked the way they had talked when they were dating. About Emma, about their work, about a trip they might someday take. About a book Sandra was reading, about nothing and everything. Under the table, Michael held her hand. She didn't pull away. They stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. Michael says that dinner cost about $80. I remember thinking it was the best $80 I had spent in years. The final stretch, $61,000, took 22 months. It was the fastest phase, not because they worked harder than before. They had always worked hard. It was because by this point, the debt avalanche was generating real momentum. Debts that had required months to eliminate were now falling in weeks. The minimum payments that had been freed up were being stacked against the remaining balances. And Michael's income had grown significantly. The consulting LLC was generating over $3,000 a month. His salary had increased again. Sandra had been offered a charge nurse position, a supervisor role, which came with a pay increase and a more predictable schedule. They were directing, in their peak months, nearly $10,000 a month against debt. Numbers that would have seemed impossible to them in 2015 were simply their monthly reality. There was also something else at work. Something harder to quantify. Michael describes it as the fury. Not anger, not desperation, not even urgency. Just a focused, controlled, almost serene fury, directed entirely at the remaining numbers. A clarity of purpose. I knew exactly what I was doing and why. I wasn't sacrificing anymore, or rather, the sacrifice had become so normal that it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like the only logical way to live. The student loans were targeted last. This was strategic. Their interest rate, 6.8% on the federal loans, was lower than the credit cards and personal loans they had already eliminated. Under the Avalanche method, you save the most money by paying off the highest rate debt first. The student loans were not the highest rate, but they were, for Michael, the most symbolic. They were the first debt he had ever taken on. The debt that had started the clock in 1998. He had been carrying it for 22 years. He wanted to see it go. In September 2019, the student loan balance was $38,000. They made a regular payment. In October, they threw $6,000 extra at it. In November, $8,200. In December, $9,100. The balance entering January 2020 was $14,440. Michael took out his laptop on the evening of January 3, 2020. Emma was in her room doing homework. Sandra was standing at the kitchen counter, making tea. He logged into the Federal Student Loan Servicer portal. The balance on the screen, $14,440. He looked at their checking account. He looked at Sandra. She put down the mug. She walked over and stood behind him. She put both hands on his shoulders. He clicked Make a Payment. He entered the amount, $14,440. Routing number, account number, amount, confirm. He pressed Submit. The screen processed for a moment, and then it refreshed. Current balance, $0.00. Account status, paid in full. Sandra's hands tightened on his shoulders. Neither of them spoke for a moment, and then Michael called out, too loud, probably, for a school night, Emma. Footsteps from the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, backpack still on, pencil in her hand. What? He turned the laptop toward her. She looked at the screen. She looked at him. She looked at the screen again. The 8-year-old processed what she was seeing. And then she said, with complete confidence, "Does this mean we're going to Disney?" Michael says he laughed. He laughed in a way he hadn't laughed in years, from somewhere deeper than happiness, from somewhere that had been under pressure for so long that the release felt physical. Sandra was crying. He was crying. Emma, utterly practical, utterly unimpressed by adult tears, said, "So, is that a yes?" And they told her yes. Let me give you the full accounting. From March 2015 to January 2020, 58 months, Michael and Sandra Bennett paid off $174,000 in consumer debt, not including the mortgage, which they continued to pay normally, and which they remain on track to pay off by 2031. The total interest and fees paid during those 58 months, approximately $41,000. That is money that is gone. That is the price of the years on the debt treadmill. The years of minimum payments, the years of silence, the years of the second email address. But here is what the numbers cannot capture. They cannot capture the night Michael sat alone at the kitchen table with a legal pad and finally faced the truth. They cannot capture what Sandra chose when she came home 2 days later. They cannot capture the 43 strangers on a forum who responded to a post from a man they had never met and would never meet. They cannot capture the moment Emma asked about Disney in February 2020, 6 weeks after the final payment. And as it turned out, 6 weeks before a global pandemic would shut down the world. Michael, Sandra, and Emma flew to Orlando, Florida. For days, a hotel inside the park. Every ride Emma wanted to go on. Every meal, every overpriced souvenir. Michael bought a pair of mouse ears. He wore them all day. He says he did not care even slightly about how he looked. He cried on the plane on the way there. Not from sadness, not from exhaustion, from something he struggles to name precisely. He calls it, simply, gratitude. Not gratitude to anyone in particular, just gratitude that it was possible. That we had done it, that we were on a plane. That Emma was asleep against Sandra's arm, and I was looking out the window, and none of it was on a credit card. The trip was not about the mouse ears. It was not about the roller coasters or the fireworks or the parade. It was proof. Proof that the decisions they had made, the quiet Tuesday decisions, the ones with no audience and no applause, the ones made at a kitchen table at 10 at night, after Emma was asleep, had built something real, had built a life that was actually theirs. Unencumbered, free. I want to close this with something Michael told me the last time we spoke. I asked him what he would say to someone who was sitting right now where he sat in 2015, at a kitchen table, looking at a number that feels impossible, carrying a secret that is getting heavier by the month. He thought about it for a moment, and then he said, "The number is not the problem. The number is just the symptom. The problem is the hiding, the silence, the second email address, whatever form it takes for you. The moment you stop hiding from it, the moment you write it down on a legal pad and bring it into the light, it stops having power over you. Not because the debt disappears, but because you stop being afraid of it. And a person who is not afraid can make a plan. And a person with a plan can work the plan. And a person working the plan, no matter how slowly, no matter how imperfectly, is moving. And movement, even when it's slow, is everything." He also said this: the financial stuff matters. The debt avalanche, the budget, the extra income, the negotiation, all of it is real, and all of it matters. But none of it would have worked if Sandra hadn't come home, if she hadn't sat at that table, if she hadn't said those 7 words. The most important financial tool I ever had was not a spreadsheet. It was a partner who chose to stay. And he said, one more thing, the last thing. He said, the system is not set up for you to win. The credit card companies are not on your side. The student loan servicers are not on your side. The medical billing department is not on your side. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's just business. Their business model depends on your confusion, on your silence, on your shame. The moment you understand how the system actually works, the moment you get that information and use it, you change the equation. You stop being a customer of the debt machine, and you start being someone who is getting out. And getting out is possible. I promise you, it is possible. It took us 58 months. It will take you a different amount of time, maybe less, maybe more, but the direction is what matters. The direction is everything. $200,000. Say that number one more time. Now hear this. People recover from it. Ordinary people, working people. People without inheritances. People without lottery tickets. People without trust funds or viral businesses or wealthy relatives. People who just, one Tuesday at a time, one line item on a spreadsheet at a time, one phone call to a collection agency at a time, decided that the life waiting on the other side was worth the work of getting there. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in Michael's story, even a piece of it, start with a legal pad. Write it all down. Every debt, every balance, every interest rate, every creditor's name. Bring it into the light. And then ask yourself the question Sandra asked. What are we going to do about it? This has been From $200,000 in Debt to Debt-Free, a true American story. Thank you for listening. If this story gave you something clarity, or hope, or just the feeling that you are not as alone in this as you thought, please subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories coming, real ones, American ones. Stories about the gap between the life we were sold and the money we were never taught to manage. And stories about the people who closed that gap anyway. One Tuesday at a time. We'll see you in the next one.